Yo, what is going on, guys? I'm back with another review video. It is going to be on my CoolerMaster MM712. Honestly, like one of the most surprising things that CoolerMaster has done. I've always been very interested in this shape because I do like small mice, and I feel like this is a very claw-heavy focused mouse with the backup being very prominent and then also like slightly lower button height. But the greatest thing about this mouse is the width. I think because of the width, it's actually going to give a lot more stability. And obviously, before talking in depth with the shape and doing my comparisons just a bit later, it's going to always be the little things that can just be talked about immediately, like the clicks. I think the clicks are honestly very impressive. In my MM720 video, I think that is the name of that weird ring finger mouse. The biggest thing was definitely the click quality was super, super bad on that mouse. But honestly, I can confidently say that these are decent. I don't feel like they're actually all that better. It's just mainly the post travel is going to be quite a bit. There's not a lot of pre travel actually. And honestly, in terms of just the optical switches itself that they're using here, they feel pretty good. Nowhere near as premium and as amazing as Razer opticals are, but they don't feel terrible, which honestly I'm very happy about. In terms of the scroll wheel itself, that's definitely going to be the biggest lacking point in my opinion, is because it's just so smooth. I don't prefer to have smooth scroll wheels. The smoothest I think I would be okay with is Extrafy scroll wheels. I feel like that and probably the Starlight 1210s edition are probably the two like softer scroll wheels that I would be okay with. But I definitely like to feel the steps in between each like movement, if that makes any sense. The press in is also very bad, and because of how light the scroll wheel is just to like start movements, just pressing it in actually makes me like move the scroll wheel up or down sometimes, especially during games. It's really irritating to have to deal with, so I've kind of just stopped using my middle mouse for anything. But in terms of the side buttons are honestly kind of like the main clicks where there is a ton of post travel. You can see over here, I can click it super far in, all the way into the shell, which is really, really irritating. But there's very little pre-travel. Right here is where it actuates. So you can see with the amount of pre and post travel on these side buttons, it's not the most premium experience, but honestly for the price, I am genuinely impressed, especially because it is a CoolerMaster product. The feet are another surprising thing about this mouse, because I know in my MM720 video, it was honestly a complete nightmare. The edges were just so sharp. I felt like it was just like a knife. Like it felt really irritating to like put my hand across, and especially on textured pads, it was really, really bad. It really just felt like it was constantly tugging on the pad. But you can see with these feet, they are a bit more rounded, and I feel like the glide is just a little bit better than compared to my MM720. They do still have this very irritating nick over here. It really doesn't hinder. When I first saw it, I did think that it was going to catch on my pad, but it genuinely doesn't. It's just like a visual irritation that I have because I guess I have minor OCD or whatever, but that is like the only annoying thing about the feet themselves. But in terms of overall quality, I feel like they perform amazingly on every pad that I've used. I've been a lot more into speed and hybrid pads recently, mainly because my main game is Overwatch, so it's very track heavy. So I prefer low initial friction, a really nice fast dynamic friction, and then stopping power I don't really mind all that much. But in all honesty, these feet perform amazingly on every pad I've used so far. I've used them on control pads like the Saturn Pro Infinity Mice Dual, and then I've also used them on textured pads that are going to be like the Hayate Otsu. I've used it on a Heian. I've used it on a Padsmith First War. I've used it on tons of pads, and they perform honestly very impressively because it just feels really nice. I feel like they're not as fast as BTL skates, but they're not as slow as core pads, which is really, really important to me. And right before I talk about the shape, I just want to talk about the battery life because it does have RGB, and I want to talk about the high sensor position. In all honesty, I feel like if you're playing claw, I don't think that high sensor position really matters all that much. I think that high sensor positions for fingertip is going to be very beneficial, although I feel like for claw, it doesn't really matter because you can see where I grip. Oh, it's very difficult to see, but my fingers are more up here. And as long as they're near your ring and thumb, I feel like that sensor position for claw is going to be really good. This higher position is just going to be mainly geared towards fingertip players. And honestly, I don't dislike it. I don't, because it doesn't hinder me. I don't particularly care, but maybe if you're a fingertip player, you'll feel it a lot better. And just talking about battery life very quickly, because this does come with RGB, and you do know that that adds at least 10% in overall aim performance. In all honesty, the Battery life was okay. I think I left it at default, so I think it's running at like 100% brightness and it's all the time. Well, whenever it's on, actually. And I feel like it's lasted me like a solid week. So it's not that bad. It's just, you know, you could turn it off and you could get more battery life. The only reason I left it on is because it looks pretty in the video and I wanted to test it just to see if anyone doesn't want the firmware, then they're going to have to leave the RGB on. So I wanted to test it for those people also. But now talking about the shape, and there is a huge reason as to why I think the shape is so good for claw. I don't play fingertip, I don't play palm, so I can never speak on those grips. So the main thing I'm always going to be referring to when I talk about shape is always going to be for claw users. So for claw, you're going to know that you want a very prominent hump just to fill the back of your palm for that extra stability when you do pull it into the back of your hand. Holy shit, you can see the light on my palm. But the main thing that separates this mouse from other mice, especially for smaller mice, but I will compare them to the X2 Mini and the Starlight 12 later, the biggest thing is going to be the overall width. And with the width here, you can see that it's not going to be super thin. It's actually going to be quite wide, but it's going to have sufficient back flare for that extra stability when you do pull the mouse into your palm. So because of that, it feels slightly, ever so slightly larger than what I would consider a small mouse. What I would consider a completely small mouse is going to be the Final Mouse Small. And in all honesty, this is really what separates these two mice for me. Obviously, the back flare is going to be the biggest thing, but the main thing is going to be the width and how wide that back flare is because it supports that hump. So it's going to feel like a much wider mouse. And because that it does feel like a wider mouse, I feel like it's going to be able to be used by a little bit more of an array of people other than people that specifically like small mice or people that specifically have small hands. I feel like you won't be able to like use this mouse if you are like a big-handed user, but I feel like small to medium, this mouse is going to be really good if you like to play claw and you don't want to break the bank. And in terms of the two mice that I do want to compare it to, it's going to be the X2 Mini and the Starlight Small. The main reason is because this is a very short mouse. In all honesty, you can see that from like the Starlight, it's going to be barely longer, to be honest. And from the X2 Mini, it's not. It's basically like the same length. I did really just use this for reference just to show off the overall shape and just compare it. But I think the closest thing I could compare it to is an X2 Mini. But there are massive differences between these two mice. And I don't like the X2 Mini for claw. I would much prefer the regular. So the biggest difference, especially just feeling it in hand, is the hump is not going to be as prominent as the MM712. And I think that is like the biggest thing that separates these two mice apart and a big reason why I don't like the Mini. I thought I would have liked the Mini because I do prefer small mice, but in all honesty, the Backflare does feel somewhat reminiscent of the Starlight Small, mainly because it just doesn't fit my palm. And then the other thing too is there's no Backflare. So usually Backflare does make the hump a little bit wider, so it fills more of my palm. But the biggest difference between the X2 Mini and the MM712 is going to be the lack of backflare and the width. Because there's no curvature on this mouse, it makes it more awkward to hold for me because of the lack of backflare, which is why I feel like this mouse would be way better for fingertip. I feel like this would absolutely excel with fingertip users, but I feel like for claw, if you desperately want an X2, you should get the medium. And then the absolute last thing to talk about is the price. It comes in at 80 bucks. If you get it on Amazon, you get free shipping if you have Prime. And off the top of my head, the only mouse that I can really think of that competes at that price is going to be the Lamzu Atlantis for claw again. But the biggest difference is going to be just the overall size difference. It's gigantic. The Lamzu Atlantis beats this in pure quality, like hands down, but the biggest difference is how big the Lamzu Atlantis is compared to the MM712. I feel like for this mouse specifically, you're gonna be like a pretty small-handed player, or you're gonna be like wanting a small mouse that is also claw focused. Before I forget, the weight, 60 grams. Feels pretty dense, I gotta be honest. I do feel like this mouse is fairly dense, so depending on your sense, it could be fatiguing. I play at 30 cm per 360 now, so it's not that fatiguing. It's actually not fatiguing at all, depending on the pad I use. But I do think that 60 grams is my comfortable range. 55 is beautiful. Like, 55 and below is like it'll make me fucking cream my pants. But 60 grams is like a very happy medium for myself. But yeah, that pretty much is all for my review. I feel like this mouse is genuinely impressive, especially for CoolerMaster. I had such incredibly low hopes for this mouse because I really liked the shape on the MM720 because it was so comfortable for claw, but it had the worst build quality I think I've ever felt. One of the worst cables, the worst stock feed I've ever used. And then the build quality overall was terrible. I genuinely could crush that thing in my hand if I wanted to. But if CoolerMaster keeps going in this direction where they're improving build quality because I cannot get this thing to creak, there is some side flicks if I push super hard, but I'm not going to be gripping my mouse that hard in game, so I have no queries with the overall quality, to be completely honest, at least the build quality. Like I said, the clicks with the insane amount of post travel, and then the super bad post travel in these side buttons. I'm not too sure why most side buttons like click into the shell. I don't really like that. Maybe it's because they're trying to protrude them, which they are very nice. But yeah, that's pretty much all from a review. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.
Oh, my hand. Oh, is there people there? Oh, no. It has to be the table. Oh, what's that? Ooh, okay.
Should have kept your head down.
Not well, at least. Wow, how dare you, dumpster.
Oh, whoa, you're not. I'm
come on down.
X9. Shit. Oh my shit.